Okay, we are back in session. And Vice Chairman, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question. One thing that sort of seems kind of obvious, as Member Chapman indicated, the requirement for a roving night watchman has been around for almost 150 years. It was noted in the report that the Coast Guard had not issued any violations for almost 30 years. Do they have any idea, or does anybody have any idea on how to deal with this, particularly as we get more technology?
Mr. Vice Chairman, yes, staff has made recommendations, and I will have Mr. Andrew Ellers answer that question.
Sir, as you pointed out, with modern technologies, there may be better ways in which that the Coast Guard can verify that roving patrol watches have been found or can be verified. So our recommendation has been specifically designed to allow the Coast Guard that flexibility to determine the best way to verify that the roving patrol watch happens, but absolutely to make sure that it happens. Okay.
Last, this is more a statement than a question, but as the chairman has pointed out, and as we've heard mentioned, the so-called normalization of deviance. What it really boils down to is failure to follow procedure. And in multiple areas, we see that. And Truth Aquatics was recognized as one of the best operators out there. And so the question comes up of what's kind of the standard of operation for all of the other operators who may not have measured up to the perceived standard that Truth Aquatics did, and how does the Coast Guard plan to deal with that? Coming from the aviation industry, we've worked really hard to try to get these things addressed, and I agree with the chairman. You know, this is a most unfortunate situation, and the fact that nothing has happened for decades on these boats, or little things have happened, doesn't mean that we were doing it right. It means we were lucky. No further questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. And as I understand it, at this time, neither members Graham nor Chapman have any additional questions. You're always welcome to pose more. But for now, and if you do need to ask more questions, just raise your hand electronically. For now, I'll call on Member Hamady.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tucker, there were 6 crew members on board: captain, second captain, first deckhand, second deckhand, and first and second galley hand. Out of those 6 crew members, who were the deck crew? Who are considered deck crew?
Out of the 6 crew members, that would have been the captain, the second captain, the first deckhand, and the second deckhand.
Okay. So then I have some questions for Dr. McKay. Dr. McKay, what drugs were the deck crew tested for?
So, Member Hamady, thanks for the question. So all of the deck crew were tested for the 15 required drugs in urine. So we're looking for urine metabolites of the 15 drugs in the DHS panel, which is identical to the DOT panel, which includes cocaine, PCP, methamphetamine, a host of opiates, and a host of other sympathomimetics. Primarily, these are drugs of abuse, and in fact, the panel is designed to only include Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 drugs in the DEA's controlled substance group.
And those are part of the regulations, both under DHS and DOT. So for the 4 deck crew, for captain, second captain, first deckhand, and second deckhand, Were any of them positive for alcohol or drugs?
They were not.
Negative. So my question is, finding 1, which will be discussed later, states the use of alcohol or other drugs by the Conception deck crew likely was not a factor in the accident. Why do we say likely? Because they tested negative.
Well, they tested negative for a very limited set of drugs of abuse. And the issue in this particular accident, it really goes to the underlying issue is that the interpretation of toxicology is not limited to the toxicology numbers. It also requires an understanding of the operational environment and the questions in this particular accident. In this particular accident, we don't know when the fire started. We know it spread rapidly, but we don't know exactly how rapidly. And if one of the deck crew had taken an over-the-counter sedating antihistamine to enhance his ability to sleep through the night and delayed his awakening by 5 minutes, would that have contributed to the outcome in this accident? So it really has to do with the intersection of all of the drugs that were not tested for, as well as all of the uncertainty in the operational side of this particular event.
Well, I appreciate that, but there are drugs listed in the regulations, which you've listed, DHS and DOT have, that are required for testing. If they're not listed in those, they're not required for testing. And, I have not seen a situation in other reports, whether it was Tempe, Arizona, whether it was, which in Tempe, Arizona, that was an evaluation by a DRE. There wasn't an actual urine test. And then in Cary, Ohio, we just considered an accident where the eastbound crew was tested, where they were negative for these same drugs, and we never said likely when it came to the eastbound crew. So why are we changing that here? Just because there could have been anything else over the counter in their system that we don't know about because it's not required for testing.
So the issue in Cary, Ohio, was the eastbound crew was not at fault. The westbound crew was at fault. And in fact, the westbound engineer was found to be full of alcohol primarily and evidence of past use of THC, the psychoactive compound in marijuana.
I'm not talking about the westbound crew, eastbound crew.
Right, but the eastbound crew was not at fault. So even if they had evidence of use of some drug in their system, it didn't contribute to the accident circumstances. The same thing is true in Tempe, Arizona. In Tempe, Arizona, the, what do they call it? The driver of the automatic vehicle, the safety driver in the automatic vehicle, was found to be watching a video on her cell phone. There is no drug that makes you watch a video on your cell phone. So we were comfortable saying, even if she had been using some substance, that it didn't contribute to the circumstances of the accident. And that's really the crux of things here. In this case, if one of these guys, these guys were literally sleeping on top of a smoldering fire. Then there were flames, there was smoke coming up. By the time the captain made the call from the bridge, he was almost unable to speak because there was so much smoke. He said, "I can't breathe."
I understand that. And I understand what their responsibility is for the accident. What I don't want is people to walk away thinking they could have been positive for drugs when they clearly tested negative for drugs.
They tested negative for a short list.
Just because we think, investigators think that it could be any possibility that there's something else out there that they're not tested for, which I think is an unfair standard. So I do have an amendment on this, and I appreciate your time. I'm out of time, and I'll turn it back over to the chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we have discussed that a safety management system could have been very useful for Truth Aquatics for a number of reasons. but for one of the reasons is it provides a feedback loop, and it provides for auditing to see how you're actually doing. So as I understand it, Congress mandated in 2010 that the Coast Guard begin rulemaking on safety management systems for small passenger vessels. And yet here we are 10 years later. And what activity has the Coast Guard taken to initiate this rulemaking?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to defer that to our safety recommendations, Mr. Scott Rainey.
Mr. Chairman, we've recently received a response from the Coast Guard dated October 2nd of this year that staff is currently evaluating. But in that response, the Coast Guard has reported that they have initiated a rulemaking project for safety management systems on small passenger vessels, and that has been published and included in their spring 2020 unified agenda of regulatory and deregulatory actions. The Coast Guard is preparing an advance notice of proposed rulemaking to request public comment on SMS rule for small passenger vessels. And in February of this year, the Coast Guard issued the Marine Safety Information Bulletin 3-20, which provides resources for voluntarily establishing a safety management system and encouraging the voluntary implementation of SMS for all small passenger vessels. And Mr. Chairman, staff is currently evaluating the Coast Guard's recent response to safety recommendation M12-3 that we are recommending reiterating in this report.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey. And the bottom line is they've not even published an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
I want to remind people that just a few months ago, this board excoriated the Federal Aviation Administration for not implementing a rule, in that case, the pilot records database, that was also mandated by Congress in 2010. We excoriated the FAA, and for a good reason, because had they done that, that accident may not have happened. Well, by the same token, if there had been a safety management system that required auditing, required a feedback loop, we may not be here today. And those 34 people would be. So what are we going to do about that? I think we need to send a very strong message to the U.S. Coast Guard. I had a very nice conversation with the Commandant of the Coast Guard yesterday, and they want to do things to improve safety. But this is ridiculous. 10 years after Congress mandated it, no visible action. So I'll just terminate my round of questions right there, and I'll return to Member Hamady. You're up next.
Thank you very much. I'm going to actually come back on that. What is the average time for Coast Guard to respond to our recommendation? Our recommendations in general?
Member Hamady, Mr. Rainey can answer that.
Member Hamady, in the last 5 years, basically since the sinking of the El Faro in October 2015, on average, approximately 6 months on the initial responses.
6 months. In fact, I see that there's even one recommendation on the El Faro that they responded, and it was just something nonsensical from the 1980s, and we said, no, we really want you to respond to this, and they still haven't responded, so it's open await response. So looking at their response, and I have a list here of elapsed time of their responses. 213 days, 160 days, 652 days without a response on something, 523 days, 294 days. In fact, we haven't had some responses, and maybe they just submitted them actually, on Branson, 159 days, because when I looked in our database, it says open await response. We may have gotten something in the meantime. But that's a long time.
It is.
Yeah. And so, one thing I wanted to raise, because we have investigated accidents in the past on and recommended SMS going back years, going back to 2010, where a passenger ferry made contact with a terminal at Staten Island. Legislation was enacted authorizing action. Coast Guard didn't take action. We've issued other recommendations on SMS, still no action. In Section 1135 of Title 49 of the U.S. Code, which is our law, it says when the NTSB submits a recommendation about transportation safety to the Secretary of Transportation, I know Coast Guard's under DHS, but it says Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary shall give to the board a formal written response to each recommendation not later than 90 days after receiving the recommendation. Then there's a process laid out. This requirement dates back to 1994, a law that was passed in 1994 when the U.S. Coast Guard was an agency within the U.S. Department of Transportation. After 9/11, the Coast Guard was, I didn't start my timer. The Coast Guard was then transferred to Homeland Security after 9/11. And is there a requirement now, after that transfer, for the Coast Guard or DHS to respond within 90 days of a safety recommendation?
No, the only 90-day requirement would be for the DOT agencies, as I understand the rule.
Right. So if anyone from Congress is listening, that is a hole right now where that needs to be addressed. The conception's been in operation since 1980, 81, right?
Yes.
And what inspections was the conception required to have?
The conception was required to have annual inspections, dry dock every 2 years, and a 5-year COI.
And when was the last inspection for the conception?
Mr. Ellers, February of 2019.
And Mr. Ellers, there were really just sort of minor issues noted over the last 5 years, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and so with that, how about the vision?
All of the vessels in the fleet had what we would consider fairly minor issues in all of their inspections.
Okay, so do you think it's odd that 1 month after the accident, the Coast Guard would come back after the vision was inspected 5 months previous to the fire and sinking, where they really didn't find any major issues? They come back and they find 40 issues, deficiencies with the vision after 1 month after the fire and sinking of the conception.
It might be considered unusual, but I will offer a couple of mitigating circumstances. One is the inspection that was conducted 1 month after was a targeted inspection as a result of the conception accident. And so the Coast Guard was taking a very deep dive into each of these vessels of this type. The other thing is that the annual inspection that was conducted in February was when a vessel goes through a certificate of inspection, the 5-year inspection, it is supposed to be a deep dive. The annual re-inspection is supposed to be at a lesser level unless the inspector finds something concerning and wants to dig deeper. So while it is perhaps unusual, there are reasons why it may have been more during the targeted inspection.
That could possibly suggest that they should go a little bit deeper on the other inspections, because if you're finding 40 5 months after an annual inspection, that you may not be looking enough prior to that. And in all that time, do inspectors could they note, hey, this vessel, the emergency egress is in the same location as the stairwell? Could they have noted those things? Do they? I know they have a chart and with a checklist. I've seen the checklist. It really doesn't ask that question, but could you have?
Absolutely. And inspectors have the opportunity, if they see any kind of safety concern, to raise that concern.
Yeah, and so I think that's a tragedy. I think, you know, in some of these situations, and this phrase is used a lot, tombstone mentality, when you don't take action until after the fact. And we have numerous accidents or incidents where we've asked the Coast Guard to take action, or we've asked operators to take action, and unfortunately, in the operator's case, it doesn't happen until after the fact, and in the Coast Guard, apparently, we need to ask 5 or 6 times. I do have additional questions, but turning it back over to the chairman.
Yeah, thank you. Do any of my colleagues have any questions before I ask questions? I don't see any at this time, so I'm going to start my timer. Thank you, Member Hamady. I want to go back to the issue of the Mr. Pantiocho, Mr. Joe P. Everybody else can pronounce it Pantiocho. Anyway, Joe P. Thank you. I want to go back to a few questions about the fire. So why do we believe that the fire did not originate in the Lazarette? What evidence do we have for that?
The crew members that were interviewed indicated that they looked into the Lazarette when they had reboarded the vessel after they swam to the stern, and there was no fire in there. Additionally, if a fire had originated in the Lazarette, for it to transition to the salon, it would have to burn everything in between, which was not the case.
Thank you. How about the engine room, which is just forward of the Lazarette? Why do we believe that the fire did not originate in the engine room?
I would offer pretty much the same answer, that the 2 crew members looked in there, and although they did see smoke, they didn't see any flames, they didn't sense any heat. And again, for it to transition to the salon, it would have to burn everything in between. Even if it transitioned through the horizontally below deck and into the bunk room, again, for it to pass through the bulkhead, it would have had to have heated it, charred it, and people would have noticed it, and the smoke detectors on the bunk room side would have gone off.
Thank you. And furthermore, the CO2 carbon. The CO2, the carbon dioxide fire extinguisher system would have more than likely would have activated in the engine room, and there was no evidence of that from the witnesses, the crew members that looked in there. Is that correct?
Correct.
We have sort of differentiated the galley area from the salon, but in reality, it was all part of the same enclosed deck house. Why do we believe it did not originate actually in the galley portion of that deck house?
Well, our understanding is that all of the galley equipment is de-energized at night. The crew members that were on the bow of the vessel trying to open the galley windows could not see any fire there. Of course, it was black with smoke, so they couldn't see into the salon, but the windows were not really hot to the touch. They were warm, but not hot. And so if a fire was in the galley, which is directly on the other side of those windows, they would have seen a fire, and it would likely have been burning out of those windows already.
And they saw the black smoke as they looked into the galley area, as opposed to fire, which they did see in the aft part of the salon. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thanks. In the report, we noted that the vent rooms, the engine room vents, were not closed by the crew. Did that in any way exacerbate the effects of the fire that we can tell?
No, that wouldn't have, because that would only have an impact on a fire in the engine room.
Thank you very much. I think probably my last question is this. The owner of Truth said that other than customer reviews, he had no other way of evaluating the performance of the captain. I do know, and I think the vice chairman alluded to this, And then in the railroad industry, they have inward-facing cameras in many locomotives. They have event data recorders. Well, let me switch to aviation. In aviation, they are routinely downloading normal flights to look for exceedances. Has the marine industry looked at anything like this to be able to check the performance of how things are going without physically being on the vessel?
Mr. Chairman, for small passenger vessels, we're not aware of any initiative like that.
Well, that may be something worth considering down the road, because you've got the captain of a ship, just like the captain of an airliner, has a lot of autonomy. But with that autonomy, they have tremendous responsibility. And so we don't necessarily want to be spying on people, but as the owner of an organization, that you do have the responsibility to make sure that when you hang out a shingle, that you're providing a safe service. I think you've got an obligation to make sure that you are, in fact, conducting things to the highest level of safety. So anyway, any other questions from any of my colleagues before we go back to Member Hamady? Okay, Member Hamady, you are now recognized for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Terrell, I wanted to ask you a question before I go back to Mr. Tucker. How does the fire and sinking of the Conception compare in terms of significance and the number of fatalities to other marine accidents that we've investigated?
Thank you, Member Hamady. So going back to 2011, the Concordia accident in Italy was about 32 fatalities, 32 lives were lost. In 2015, the El Faro sank, and that was 33 fatalities. And so now the Conception is probably the greatest loss of life in the U.S. Merchant Marine for many decades at 34.
So you have the greatest loss of life in many decades. Clearly, we want to see what brought that about, what safety issues exist, how should those be addressed, because we'd never want that to ever happen again.
Correct.
We don't want the families to have to experience what these families are experiencing now, ever. And so my question is on the legal side, and I don't know if this is you or Mr. Tucker, you tell me, but earlier somebody mentioned that we were unable to, I believe Mr. Tucker, we were unable to interview two of the crew. And those, the two of the remaining crew. It was the captain and?
One of the galley hands.
One of the galley hands. And why was it important for us to interview the captain, and what would have we liked to ask?
Adam?
Yeah, Member Hamady, the captain of the Conception had been with the company for over 3 decades. He had operated the Conception for that duration of time and more. So he had a very intricate knowledge of the vessel. He had knowledge of the operation of the vessel. He had knowledge of every past inspection, Coast Guard inspection of the vessel, and just all the systems in general. So unfortunately, we were not able to ask him these questions and learn from him his side of the story.
And we were not able to ask him that, not because he refused. In fact, he showed up for the interview, wanted to be interviewed, and waited for a very substantial amount of time to be interviewed. But what happened?
Member Hamady, you're correct. he did wait. He showed up twice, and we were unable to interview him due to the parallel criminal investigation.
Right. And so, in addition to that, so those two, which would have been key for interviewing, we had several others we wanted to interview, but once, as you said earlier to the vice chairman, you know, once word gets out about a criminal investigation, people start getting a little bit concerned about talking. From between September 8th and September 10th, the assistant U.S. attorney served search warrants on the offices of Truth Aquatics and their 2 remaining vessels. Were we able to get all the records and information we would have wanted from Truth Aquatics after that?
Member Hammond, the records, yes. We were provided all the records in February of 2020. And there were other items that were taken as evidence by the Department of Justice. They were electronic devices, and they are still in their possession. So we were unable to see if there was any information relevant to this accident contained in any electronic devices.
How many electronic devices are we talking about?
Member Hammondy, there were, I'm estimating, around 15.
So 15 that we did not have access to that information.
That is correct.
How about wreckage access?
Wreckage access. So when the wreckage was moved to the naval base, we did have unrestricted access to the wreckage. However, we were not able to take the party, Truth Aquatics, with us. They would have been important because the owner of the vessel knows that vessel. He's seen the building of that vessel. He can identify parts and materials that were recovered at that time.
How about structural components or loose items in the hull?
That is correct. He would have been integral in identifying those parts.
Did we have access to those?
We did have access to those, yes.
Okay, and I read in one of the factual reports that some of the components were found in trash bags on the side.
That is correct. By the time we had returned to the exam site, a lot of the material was put in trash bags alongside. We were allowed access to that material. All we had to do was remove it, and that was it.
Okay. And this isn't the first time where we've run into a situation, and actually many times, whether it's Schoharie in New York, where we had significant issues with legal, some legal actions that were taken at the same time, or criminal matters were moving at the same time of our safety investigation, but also duck. So I guess, Mr. Terrell, I mean, what's the answer for going forward? And I know you got into this a bit with the vice chairman, but if you can talk about that a little bit more. I mean, there has to be a way where the FBI and the assistant attorney can pursue things can pursue criminal matters, but still allow us to do our safety investigation.
Correct.
Because, once they're done prosecuting, we still have a safety issue.
Correct. Member Hamidi, yes, we agree. There's an issue here, and like you said, it impacted the duck investigation as well. It's starting to rear its head, not just in marine investigations, but other modes. As safety investigators, we only ask to have unimpeded access to wreckage, witnesses, and documents immediately after an accident to be allowed to do our job in a timely fashion. And by not having the documents contemporaneously with the interviews, it prevents our investigators from asking relevant questions. This impacts not just the NTSB, but also the Coast Guard and other safety investigators we might be working with, especially in international investigation. We do believe that we can work in a parallel fashion. We have for many years. The FBI and the ATF were very helpful in this investigation, so we work routinely with many other agencies, and we want to continue doing that. We think the answer is working with the Department of Justice and perhaps working, developing an MOU. But I do want to thank the Office of General Counsel for all their hard work in this case. It was a very complex investigation and was made more so with the delays we experienced. And I think Kathleen has some comments to add. Kathy?
Member Hamady, yes, we appreciate the question because it is a challenge. And it's frequently a challenge in the early parts of an investigation. Because again, remember our statute and our regs appreciate that there are other agencies that have a role in accidents and investigative work. And our regulations actually direct us to cooperate and share information with others who have some other obligation as far as their own investigative work. But in those early days, it's very hard, particularly in a criminal case, to determine is this an intentional act or not, which sometimes is what precipitates the delays and the concerns. And we as an agency typically respect not wanting to interfere with that criminal work. Here, again, it took some more time. It took some more discussion and cooperation. And luckily, as with most of our modes, the investigative staff not only was collecting other information that was helpful, but they found other means to get to the safety information to where they could bring these recommendations before the board today. But as Morgan was talking about, I think one of our goals is to keep working with the outside organizations, to work with the Department of Justice. We need to keep informing what the board does, what our roles are, what other roles are, so that we can make sure we continue to work well together.
Thank you. And one last statement and question. We were able to get a lot of information, as you just said, for this investigation. And I would just end with asking Mr. Tucker, part of that information came from the general public. We made several pleas during different press events asking for the public to send us information via our witness at ntsb.gov email address, and that was successful. And I'll let you talk about that for a second, and I'm done with my questions. Thank you.
Yes, Member Hamady, and thank you for making that point. The witness at ntsb.gov was very helpful to us, and I'd personally like to thank everybody that had submitted information, pictures, videos, historical information on the vessel. It was all quite helpful, and we do appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Do any of my colleagues have any additional questions? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Bryson, if you would please read the proposed findings.
Yes, sir. As a result of this investigation, staff proposes 18 findings. Number 1, weather and sea conditions were not factors in the accident. Number 2, the use of alcohol or other drugs by the Conception deck crew likely was not a factor in the accident. Number 3, the origin of the fire on the Conception was likely inside the aft portion of the salon. Number 4, although a definitive ignition source cannot be determined, the most likely ignition sources include the electrical distribution system of the vessel, unattended batteries being charged, improperly discarded smoking materials, or another undetermined ignition source. Number 5, the exact timing of the ignition cannot be determined. Number 6, most of the victims were awake, but could not escape the bunk room before all were overcome by smoke inhalation. Number 7, the fire in the salon on the main deck would have been well developed before the smoke activated the smoke detectors in the bunk room. Number 8, Although the arrangement of detectors aboard the Conception met regulatory requirements, the lack of smoke detectors in the salon delayed detection and allowed for the growth of the fire, precluded firefighting and evacuation efforts, and directly led to the high number of fatalities in the accident. Number 9, interconnected smoke detectors in all accommodation spaces on Subchapter T and Subchapter K vessels would increase the chance that fires will be detected early enough to allow for successful firefighting and the evacuation of passengers and crew. Number 10, the absence of the required roving patrol on the Conception delayed detection and allowed for the growth of the fire, precluded firefighting and evacuation efforts, and directly led to the high number of fatalities in the accident. Number 11, the U.S. Coast Guard does not have an effective means of verifying compliance with roving patrol requirements for small passenger vessels. Number 12, the Conception bunkroom's emergency escape arrangements were inadequate because both means of escape led to the same space, which was obstructed by a well-developed fire. Number 13, Subchapter T, old and new regulations are not adequate because they allow for primary and secondary means of escape to exit into the same space, which could result in those paths being blocked by a single hazard. Number 14, although designed in accordance with the applicable regulations, the effectiveness of the Conception's bunkroom escape hatch as a means of escape was diminished by the location of bunks immediately under the hatch. Number 15, the emergency response by the Coast Guard and municipal responders to the accident was appropriate, but was unable to prevent the loss of life, given the rapid growth of the fire at the time of detection and location of the Conception. Number 16, Truth Aquatics' safety oversight of its vessels' operations was inadequate. Number 17, had a safety management system been implemented, Truth Aquatics could have identified unsafe practices and fire risks on the Conception and taken corrective action before the accident occurred. And number 18, implementing safety management systems on all domestic passenger vessels would further enhance operators' ability to achieve a higher standard of safety.
Ms. Bryson, thank you very much. At this time, we'll do a roll call to ensure that all of the board members are prepared to deliberate. Vice Chairman Landsberg.
Present and ready to deliberate, sir.
Okay. Member Hamady.
I'm present, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. I'm pinning you on. Okay. Member Graham.
I am present and ready to deliberate.
Thank you very much. And Member Chapman.
Present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. As far as amendments are concerned, I do understand that we have at least 2 amendments. Are there any other proposed amendments other than what Member Hamady is proposing? Okay, if that's the case, Member Hamady, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment to finding number 2. And my amendment would remove the word likely. Finding 2 currently reads the use of alcohol or other drugs by the Conception deck crew, which again was the captain, second captain, first deckhand, and second deckhand. It currently says likely was not a factor in the accident, and my amendment would remove the word likely.
Okay, there's Member Hamady's motion to remove the word likely from finding number 2. Is there a second?
I'll second, sir, for friendly discussion.
Okay, it's been seconded by Vice Chairman Landsberg. Member Hamady.
Thank you. The NTSB has a stellar reputation for our accident investigations and for conducting fact-based investigations. And if in this situation, the 4 deck crew tested negative for drugs and alcohol, yet we have a finding that says the use of alcohol or other drugs by the deck crew was likely not a factor in this accident. I think that if the standard is now going forward that anybody could have alcohol or drugs in their system that was part of an accident that we investigate outside of DOT or DHS regulations, then the standard would have to be likely every single time. Because the argument is, or was stated, that they could have had Benadryl, they could have had something else they weren't tested for, not required under testing requirements. That would be the standard for everyone. So we would always say likely, and in this situation, they did not test positive. They tested negative, so I think it is a slippery slope. Our accident investigations are fact-based. The fact is, these 4 crew members tested negative for alcohol and drugs. That's what should be reflected in the report.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Discussion amongst my crew members, amongst my colleagues. Well, I'll jump in there, and we certainly will want to hear from staff as well. I do agree, Member Hamady, that we do want to conduct stellar investigations and that they need to be fact-based. And I think that unless we can absolutely rule something out, then the word likely is appropriate. It's kind of ironic because later in this board meeting, I'm going to argue to add the word likely because I'm not convinced that we can absolutely say what we are saying. I think the report itself, the main body of the report, clearly states that those crew members did not test for certain drugs. I do hear, and we do want to hear from Dr. McKay. I do hear what Dr. McKay is saying. Diphenhydramine is not something that is tested for, and yet it is a sleep aid and also a widely used over-the-counter cold medication. So I at this point, I believe the word likely is appropriate. Other comments?
I'd like to respond.
Well, absolutely.
I think we should not be in the position of, unless we can rule it out, it should be likely. There's no evidence suggesting otherwise, 0 evidence. And I think creating uncertainty when we've clearly stated in the body of the report that they've tested negative, and yet in the findings, we're creating uncertainty by using the word likely is not right.
Okay, Member Chapman, did you want to say something?
Yes, I think Member Hamady makes a good point, and particularly going forward, I don't know how it seems to me that similar findings going forward will have to be conditional, and I don't think that's helpful. And I wonder if maybe the way to solve this is not to arm wrestle over whether likely should or shouldn't be in the finding, but make the finding more precise. Make the finding speak to what we do know, which is that they didn't test positive or they tested negative for the drugs for which they were tested. Because we can never, so far as I know, we can never completely eliminate the possibility that there may have been drugs involved. But we do know that they were tested for certain drugs and they tested negative for those drugs. Why couldn't we reword the statement so that it refers to what they were tested for?
Well, there's a motion on the table, and so if we want to get into rewording it, then we'll have to do something with this motion. So any other comments from my colleagues before we turn to the staff? Vice Chairman Landsberg.
I think I tend to agree with Member Chapman in that otherwise we're always out there looking at virtually everything that could possibly, and yet we have no data whatsoever to say. So I think I would, as it is stated, maybe that's not the best way, but I think if we said that they were tested for specific areas, then that cuts the baby in half, so to speak, and solves the problem in terms of being specific. And going forward, I think if we have any indications or we have any concerns that somebody who is in a safety critical position has somehow been impaired by an over-the-counter drug, then maybe we ought to be testing for that. And then we could make the positive statement.
If I could add, in the past, we've said likely when somebody tested positive for marijuana, but we've said that could have been in their system for the past 30 days, 45 days, whatever it is. In this situation, we have no evidence to suggest that.
Okay, thank you. Member Graham.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't like likely in this case. The standard was set. They tested negative. And now we're talking about 4 crew members. So we're saying that it could have been any one of them. And then even in the interviews, they were very explicit about drugs and alcohol were not allowed. And it seemed like the crew members really lived up to that part of the guidelines that were given out by the company, although the others weren't. So I'm not a fan of likely. I don't like that either.
I kind of like likely, but I want to go to the staff, and why don't we start out with Dr. McKay?
Actually, Chairman, this is Morgan just jumping in here. Yeah. I have sort of run this by the doctor, and we understand Member Hominy's concern, and Member Chapman, we were listening to you as well, as maybe there's a middle ground, and we were counter-proposing maybe that we strike the word likely and insert the words the use of alcohol or other, quote, tested for, unquote, drugs by the conception crew. So that sort of eliminates the likely word and actually makes it a little more precise.
I'd like for you to specifically read that, because we've got a motion on the table, and so let's see what you are proposing to say into that, if you would, please.
Yes, sir. So finding number 2, the use of alcohol or other, quote, tested for, end quote, drugs by the conception deck crew was not a factor in the accident.
Well, that really kind of waters it down. I mean, that the point that Dr. McKay was making is that there could have been some other drug other than a 15 panel that could have caused drowsiness. I mean,
I'll let Dr. Mary Pat talk about herself there. So go ahead, doctor.
Sorry, so this is language that we have used at the board in the past. It's very specific. The report, actually, I believe the report has a footnote that lists the drugs that were tested for. And I will say that I know Morgan was responding to a text I sent, but the quotation marks don't need to be in there. So it would simply be that alcohol or other tested for drugs, and then the likely would be removed.
Thank you, doctor.
All right. Okay. So let me just read that, and then I'll go back to my colleagues here. So what staff apparently is proposing is the use of alcohol or other tested for drugs by the conception deck crew was not a factor in the accident. Is that basically what staff was recommending or suggesting?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Member Hominy, if we were to withdraw your motion or accept a friendly amendment, would you be willing to go for that?
I would withdraw my amendment, and go for that change, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Member Hamady has agreed to withdraw her motion. Vice Chairman, since you seconded it, would you be willing to go along with that as well?
I absolutely would, sir.
Thank you very much. Member Hamady, you're recognized.
Then I will withdraw my motion on finding 2 and offer the following amendment to finding 2, which reads would read the use of alcohol or other tested for drugs by the conception deck crew was not a factor in the accident.
Okay, that's her motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Vice Chairman seconds. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll proceed with a roll call vote to amend finding number 2 as read, and we'll go to a roll call vote. I think I said that. Those in favor of the motion will state aye. Those opposed will state no. Vice Chairman Landsberg.
Vice Chairman votes aye.
Vice Chairman votes aye. Member Hamady.
Member Hamady votes aye.
Member Hamady votes aye. Member Graham.
Member Graham votes aye.
Member Graham votes aye. Member Chapman.
Member Chapman votes aye.
Member Chapman votes aye. And the chairman votes aye. So we have unanimously adopted finding number 2. Okay, Member Hamady, I believe you have an amendment for another finding as well.
Yes, I have an amendment, and thank you to Dr. McKay and Mr. Terrell and to my crew. Did you call us crew members, Mr. Chairman? To my fellow crew members for making that
Sorry, it's the airline pilot in me. Sorry about that.
Understood. I liked it. I have an amendment to finding number 16. Finding number 16 currently states Truth Aquatics safety oversight of its vessels operations was inadequate. My amendment would replace that to read Truth Aquatics provided limited safety oversight of its vessels operations, which jeopardized the safety of crew members and passengers.
Okay, there's Member Hamady's motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Member Graham seconds. A discussion. Member Hamady, please.
Thank you. In reading 16, and I understand what the staff was going for there, I just really thought after I read through the docket and the excellent materials that the investigative staff put together, that inadequate was not strong enough of a word to what really was going on. They really did, staff didn't feel that we could say there was no oversight because we weren't able to talk with the captain and one of the other crew members, but that there was limited oversight. And so that's why it says limited, and then it clearly their inadequacies jeopardize the safety of crew members and the passengers, which is why I added that, because I thought it needed to be stronger.
Thank you very much. Discussion from my colleagues.
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
I like the amendment. I do want to make one suggestion, though, because I think both in the original finding as proposed and in the amendment that Member Hamady offers, there's an inconsistency with the wording in the probable cause. And I know we may end up discussing some changes to the probable cause as well, but I don't think this would impact that. The probable cause speaks in terms of effective or ineffective oversight. The original finding talks about inadequate oversight, and the amendment talks about limited oversight. I think we should stick with the terminology that's in the probable cause, which is effective or ineffective.
I totally agree. I had flagged that as well, because you're right. In the proposed probable cause that Member Hamady will offer, we do refer to lack of effective oversight. So what you're proposing is for a friendly amendment, I think, to cause number 16 to state Truth Aquatics Truth Aquatics provided ineffective safety oversight of its vessels' operations, which jeopardized the safety of crew members and passengers. Is that what you were thinking, Member Chapman?
Yes, that's correct. That's what I would suggest, is to replace limited with ineffective.
I do agree with that, but it's not up to me. So I do want to hear from all of the colleagues. But Member Hamady, what would be your thoughts to that friendly amendment to strike the word limited, replace with ineffective?
I'm okay with replacing that word.
Yeah, further discussion with my colleagues. Yes, sir, Member Graham.
I would definitely support that, and I think it'd be consistent with the rest of the report, like Member Chapman has pointed out.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Landsberg, any thoughts from you?
I agree.
Thank you. And we'll turn to the staff now. And Mr. Terrell, what says the staff?
Yes, sir. We concur with the amendment, the friendly amendment by Member Chapman, and the original insertion of the words which jeopardize the safety of crew members and passengers. So the staff has no objection. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion with the colleagues? Member Hamady, would you kindly restate the motion and then we'll take a vote on it? The motion's been go ahead.
It would read, finding 16 would read, Truth Aquatics ineffective safety oversight. Oh, no, that doesn't work, actually.
Yeah, provided. Truth Aquatics provided
ineffective safety oversight of its vessels' operations, which jeopardized the safety of crew members and passengers.
And that would be your motion, I believe.
Correct.
Yes, and it's been seconded. So any further discussion? Okay, it's been moved and seconded to amend finding 16 to read as Member Hamady read it. We'll proceed to a roll call vote. Vice Chairman Landsberg.
Vice Chairman votes aye.
Vice Chairman votes aye. Member Hamady.
Aye.
Member Hamady votes aye. Member Graham.
Member Graham votes aye.
Member Graham votes aye. Member Chapman.
Member Chapman votes aye.
Member Chapman votes aye. The chairman votes aye. Finding 16 has been amended as proposed by Member Hamady. Any other amendments to the findings? Okay, do I have a motion to adopt the findings as amended?
So moved.
Vice Chairman has moved.
Second.
It's been seconded. We have a motion to adopt the findings as amended. It's been seconded. Is there any further discussion on this? Okay, roll call vote. Vice Chairman Landsberg.
Vice Chairman votes aye.
Vice Chairman votes aye. Member Hamady.
Member Hamady votes aye.
Member Hamady votes aye. Member Graham.
Member Graham votes aye.
Member Graham votes aye. Member Chapman.
Member Chapman votes aye.
Member Chapman votes aye. The chairman votes aye. The findings have been adopted as amended. Ms. Bryson, if you'll please read the proposed probable cause.
Yes, sir. Staff proposes the following probable cause. The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of the accident on board the small passenger vessel Conception was the ineffective oversight of Truth Aquatics, Inc., which did not ensure that a required roving patrol was maintained, allowing a fire of unknown cause to grow undetected in the vicinity of the aft salon on the main deck. Contributing to the undetected growth of the fire was the lack of a regulatory requirement for smoke detection in all accommodation spaces. Contributing to the high loss of life were the inadequate emergency escape arrangements from the vessel's bunk room, as both exited into a compartment that was engulfed in fire, therefore preventing escape.
Ms. Bryson, thank you very much. I believe we have one proposed amendment to the probable cause. I will likely withdraw my proposed amendment, but Mr. Graham, go ahead, please.
Yeah, did the managing director mean to say thereby preventing escape instead of therefore? in the probable cause at the last sentence?
I did. It is written thereby preventing escape.
Yeah. I thought I heard therefore.
I may have. Thank you for catching that.
Yeah, I just want to.
Yeah, thank you very much for catching that. Okay, thank you. Is there a, so just so I can get an idea, I know that Member Hamady, I believe you're proposing an amendment to the probable cause. Any other potential amendments? Okay, again, I will likely not even offer mine because I think hers is going to be better and will take care of the concern I had. So Member Hamady, you are recognized.
Thank you very much. I have an amendment to the probable cause so that the probable cause would read, the National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of the accident on board the small passenger vessel Conception was the failure of Truth Aquatics, Inc. to provide effective oversight of vessel and crew member operations, including requirements to ensure that a roving patrol was maintained, which allowed a fire of unknown cause to grow undetected in the vicinity of the aft salon on the main deck. Contributing to the undetected growth of the fire was the lack of a United States Coast Guard regulatory requirement for smoke detection in all accommodation spaces. Contributing to the high loss of life were the inadequate emergency escape arrangements from the vessel's bunkroom, as both exited into a compartment that was engulfed in fire, thereby preventing escape.
Thank you. And I think you probably said it. That is your motion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was officially a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Member Chapman seconds it. Discussion.
Thank you very much. The original probable cause did discuss ineffective oversight of Truth Aquatics, although there was going to be a change to that. I think my concern was that it wasn't strong enough. At the end of the day, there's one person in charge of safety, and that was the owner of these vessels and the owner of the company, and that was Truth Aquatics. It is clear to me, based on the interviews and the documentation that the investigative staff gathered, that the owner of Truth Aquatics had no idea what was going on his vessels, and that he turned it. It was a complete turnover of all safety oversight to the captains of those vessels. And while that may be how the industry operates, it's not right. He's responsible for safety, and I think it should be made very clear that that was a failure. In addition, I wanted to be very clear whose regulatory requirement that is for smoke detection, and that is the United States Coast Guard.
Yeah, thank you very much. Comments, questions from the board members?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the amendment strengthens the probable cause, and I support it.
Thank you. Member Graham.
I would support it also because like another marine accident we had earlier this year that went to a board meeting that lacked operational control from the top, that no doubt this did too. So I think it's time we let the industry know that they all need to get on board with this. So I would support the amendment.
Thank you. Vice Chairman, any thoughts from you, sir?
I have nothing to add other than I agree. And also in our discussions, we talked about how long it took for Coast Guard to respond to some of the recommendations. I would hope that that's not lost on them.
Thank you. Member Hamady, I'm going to ask that you consider adding one word, and it's the word "it's." And so it would read, I'll just say, the National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of the accident on board the small passenger vessel Conception was the failure of Truth Aquatics, Inc. to provide effective oversight over its vessel and crew member operations.
Oversight over or oversight of it?
I'm sorry, whatever. Yeah, I'm sorry. Oversight of, just as the way you wrote it, oversight of its vessels and crew member operations.
I think that is a good change. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for what I believe all of us will support is a much, nothing against what staff has proposed, but I think it is stronger. And Member Graham, I think you seconded her motion, so we're just proposing as a friendly amendment to just, I'm sorry, as Member Chapman, but to add in the word "its." So we're saying that effective oversight of its vessels and crew member operations.
Yes, that's a good change, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Before I turn to staff, any further discussion amongst the board members?
And just to clarify, it's vessel and crew member operations. So vessel operation, not just the vessels itself.
Yeah, thank you. I may not have read that properly. So shall I just read that first sentence again? Does everybody understand it?
Sure.
Could you read it again?
Yeah, I think I will, because just to make sure that since we've pen and inked in something. So Member Homidy's amended motion or motion with a friendly amendment would be: the National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of the accident on board the small passenger vessel Conception was the failure of Truth Aquatics, Inc. to provide effective oversight of its vessel and crew member operations, including requirements to ensure that a roving patrol was maintained. And then of course, nothing else it would be just exactly the way that Member Hominy read it. So I just want to make sure we all knew where that "its" was being added in there. Staff, what would be your thoughts on this proposed amendment that Member Hominy has proposed?
Thank you, Chairman, board members. I appreciate that. We generally don't object to the proposed improvements in the first sentence. For the second sentence, the office would prefer to keep the original draft language. It's true that the single point of failure existed for a long time, and staff's proposed a recommendation to the Coast Guard for installed fire detection on small passenger vessels, but this is not a big issue for us, but just our preference. Thank you.
Thank you. I have seen in the past probable cause statements where we have disembodied the organization that was involved. And I believe I may have seen a draft probable cause at one time in my life that did not include the very organization that had the accident. And I don't agree with that. I think when we're naming in a probable cause, if it's company XYZ, we need to name company XYZ. We're not trying to hide anything. We need to call it that way. And likewise, who was the regulatory authority that did not, did not have a regulatory requirement for smoke detection in all accommodation spaces? Who was the regulatory authority? Was it the FAA? Was it the DOT? Who was it? It was the U.S. Coast Guard that didn't have that requirement, and so I support it, and I respect the viewpoint of staff. But I do believe that when we're talking about naming organizations in a probable cause statement, we shouldn't hide who we're trying to say.
Yes, Chair. We understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I want to say too that we have had, and this is not about being best buddies with anybody, but we do have a good working relationship with the Coast Guard. I mean that sincerely. Again, I had a conversation with the Commandant yesterday. Morgan, you were on the call, and I know that they are committed to doing whatever they can within the legal framework to improve safety. And we appreciate the work that the Coast Guard has done with us over the years. And I will specifically call out Captain Neubauer, because he's always helped us so much. That said, any other discussion regarding the proposed amendment by Member Hamady? Okay, seeing none, it's been moved and seconded to adopt the probable cause as amended by Member Hamady, and we will be voting to approve the entire probable cause, not just a section of it, but the entire probable cause as read by Member Hamady. Okay, any questions about what we're voting on? Okay, Vice Chairman Landsberg, what say you, sir?
Vice Chairman votes aye.
Vice Chairman votes aye. Member Hamady.
Member Hamady votes aye.
Member Hamady votes aye. Member Graham.
Member Graham votes aye.
Member Graham votes aye. Member Chapman.
Member Chapman votes aye.
Member Chapman votes aye. The chairman votes aye. The probable cause has been adopted as amended. Ms. Bryson, if you'd please read the proposed recommendations.
Yes, sir. As a result of its investigation, the National Transportation Safety Board makes the following 10 new safety recommendations. And in addition, we're making a recommendation to reiterate one previous recommendation. There are 7 new recommendations to the U.S. Coast Guard. Number 1, revise Title 46 Code of Federal Regulations, Subchapter T, to require that newly constructed vessels with overnight accommodations have smoke detectors in all accommodation spaces. Number 2, revise Title 46 Code of Federal Regulations, Subchapter T, to require that all vessels with overnight accommodations currently in service, including those constructed prior to 1996, have smoke detectors in all accommodation spaces. Number 3, revise Title 46 Code of Federal Regulations, Subchapter T and Subchapter K, to require all vessels with overnight accommodations, including vessels constructed prior to 1996, have interconnected smoke detectors, such that when one detector alarms, the remaining detectors also alarm. Number 4, develop and implement an inspection procedure to verify that small passenger vessel owners, operators, and charterers are conducting roving patrols as required by Title 46 Code of Federal Regulations, Subchapter T. Number 5, revise Title 46 Code of Federal Regulations, Subchapter T, to require newly constructed small passenger vessels with overnight accommodations to provide a secondary means of escape into a different space than the primary exit so that a single fire should not affect both escape paths. Number 6, revise Title 46 Code of Federal Regulations, Subchapter T, to require all small passenger vessels with overnight accommodations, including those constructed prior to 1996, to provide a secondary means of escape into a different space than the primary exit so that a single fire should not affect both escape paths. Number 7, review the suitability of Title 46 Code of Federal Regulations, Subchapter T, regulations regarding means of escape to ensure there are no obstructions to egress on small passenger vessels constructed prior to 1996 and modify regulations accordingly. In addition, there are 2 recommendations to the Passenger Vessel Association, Sport Fishing Association of California, and National Association of Charter Boat Operators. The first of those, which is recommendation number 8, until the U.S. Coast Guard requires all passenger vessels with overnight accommodations, including vessels constructed prior to 1996, to have smoke detectors in all accommodation spaces. Share the circumstances of the conception accident with your members and encourage your members to voluntarily install interconnected smoke and fire detectors in all accommodation spaces such that when one detector alarms, the remaining detectors also alarm. The second recommendation to that group, which is recommendation number 9, until the U.S. Coast Guard requires small passenger vessels with overnight accommodations to provide a secondary means of escape into a different space than the primary exit, share the circumstances of the conception accident with your members and encourage your members to voluntarily do so. In addition, there is one recommendation to Truth Aquatics, which is the 10th new recommendation, and that is to implement a safety management system for your fleet to improve safety practices and minimize risk. As I mentioned, there is one recommendation to be reiterated in this report, and that recommendation is M12-3, which states, as a result of its investigation of this accident, the National Transportation Safety Board reiterates safety recommendation M12-3, which is currently classified as open unacceptable response. And that is to the United States Coast Guard, to the United States Coast Guard, require all operators of U.S. flagged passenger vessels to implement SMS, taking into account the characteristics, methods of operation, and nature of service of these vessels, and with respect to ferries, the sizes of the ferry systems within which the vessels operate. And that, again, is M12-3. And this concludes the recommendations.
Thank you very much. Do I have a motion to adopt the recommendations as read?
So moved.
Okay, Vice Chairman has moved.
Second.
And Member Graham has seconded. Any discussion regarding the recommendations? Seeing none. It's been moved and seconded to adopt the recommendations as proposed. There's no discussion, no further discussion. Roll call vote. Vice Chairman Landsberg.
Vice Chairman votes aye.
Vice Chairman votes aye. Member Hamady.
Member Hamady votes aye.
Member Hamady votes aye. Member Graham.
Member Graham votes aye.
Member Graham votes aye. Member Chapman.
Member Chapman votes aye.
Member Chapman votes aye. The chairman votes aye. The recommendations have been adopted as proposed. As far as the adoption of the final report, I do have one motion for the final report. And I'm going to make a motion right now. This is what I circulated at about 6 o'clock last night in writing, if you have it. My motion is to, on page 101, line 11, I'm going to take that likely that we struck earlier and propose that we add it here. So on page 101, line 11, insert the word likely, and the sentence would now read, if the company had been actively engaged in ensuring the safe practices required by regulations were being followed, most notably the requirement for a roving patrol, the fire would likely have been discovered earlier and the consequences of this onboard fire would have been greatly diminished. So that is my motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah, Member Hamady has seconded, and this bugged me all weekend long. So if in fact, if this was let's just say that we've kind of said it could be an electrical fire, it could be a lithium battery fire, it could be a discarding smoking materials, or it could be something else. I'm very suspicious of the lithium batteries, given their history. And they can explode and they can ignite very quickly. And given that the lithium batteries were toward the aft part of the salon, a rapid fire there could have blocked both the escape hatch, which was in the aft portion of the salon, and of course the circular stairway, which was in the up front close to the galley. So, the roving watch person could have been in the engine room or something looking at something, and this thing would have ostensibly could have exploded, and there may not have been anything that could have reduced the consequences. So I would just feel better saying that the fire would likely have been discovered earlier, and that's my motion. Discussion.
I like it.
Likely it. Okay, thanks. Any other discussion before we turn to staff?
I would just add that I think it's a good change. I agree with your comments about lithium batteries, as I've worked on those issues for a number of years, and something could happen very quickly and it may not be discovered until too late in another situation, even with a roving patrol. So thank you for that change.
Well, thank you. Member Graham.
Yeah, I'm like I said earlier, I'm not always a fan of likely, but I think in this case, I was afraid it was going to diminish what we're trying to get across here. I have no doubt if they were effectively doing a roving patrol, that it would have diminished the outcome of this tragedy. But like you said, in the scenario you just gave us an example of, I think in this case likely would be appropriate, so I would support it.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, and certainly I don't expect people to vote on something just because I offer it as an amendment, but it bothered me. I'm going to let it go. And then finally, last night, as you know, at 6 o'clock, I came and typed up something and emailed to everyone. Member Chapman, any thoughts on your part, sir?
You know, I was leaning against it, Mr. Chairman, but you made a good argument, and Member Graham just alluded to it. Your point about the fact that even had they been aware of this, the severity of lithium battery fires can sometimes be really significant, and because of the location of where the charging was going on, had a fire ignited and spread quickly, even if they had been Johnny on the spot, I'm not sure it would have made a difference because it would have blocked the escape route.
It could have, and thank you. By the way, the board will release in the next 30 days or so a report on how emergency responders deal with electric vehicle fires. And just today in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article about the same thing, that when first responders go to these electric vehicles, which are becoming widely used, they do pose a hazard for first responders. So the lithium batteries can be wonderful. They provide a lot of energy source, but they have a potential downside as well. Staff, any thoughts on the amendment offered by me?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to weigh in here. My great writer, Kristen, she did a terrific job in this report, and we've been looking at your change. We would like to propose that the wording would be, the fire likely would have been discovered.
Yes. I'm certainly fine with that. And so it would just say the fire, instead of, we're just moving the word likely, we're moving it, the fire likely
would have been discovered.
Yep.
Yes.
I don't have a problem with that. I'll accept that if I accept the friendly amendment. So it'd say the fire likely would have been discovered earlier.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Member Hamady, you seconded it. So could you go along with that?
Yep. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to point out, this was Kristen's first report, and she's done a great job of it. So thank you very much. So there's a motion on the table. It's been moved and seconded to adopt the motion as proposed by me. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none. Roll call vote. Vice Chairman Landsberg, do you adopt do you vote for the amendment?
Vice Chairman votes aye.
Vice Chairman votes aye. Member Hamady.
Member Hamady votes aye.
Member Hamady votes aye. Member Graham.
Member Graham votes aye.
Member Graham votes aye. Member Chapman.
Member Chapman votes aye.
Member Chapman votes aye. The chairman votes aye. The amendment for the amendment offered by the chairman has been adopted unanimously. And now, does anyone have any issues or discussion related to the report that they would like to talk about right now? Seeing none, is there a motion to adopt the report as revised?
I so move.
Second.
Member Hamady votes aye. Vice Chair, Vice Member Hamady, whatever. Member
I'm
Hamady.
gonna vote aye, but I'm not there yet.
Member Hamady moves to adopt the report as revised. Vice Chairman Landsberg seconds. Is there any discussion regarding that motion? Okay, thanks. We'll now vote to adopt the final report as amended. Vice Chairman Landsberg.
Vice Chairman votes aye.
Vice Chairman votes aye. Member Hamady.
Member Hamady votes aye.
Member Hamady votes aye. Member Graham.
Member Graham votes aye.
Member Graham votes aye. Member Chapman.
Member Chapman votes aye.
Member Chapman votes aye. The chairman votes aye. The report has been adopted as revised. Do any members wish the right to file a concurring or dissenting statement?
I'd like to reserve the right, sir.
Okay, Member Hamady does. Okay, seeing no more. As we prepare to wrap up the board meeting, I invite those participating in the meeting to turn off their cameras and microphones. In closing, I want to thank my colleagues on the board for their preparation going into the board meeting. I thought about saying this at the very beginning. I was very impressed with the comments that you wrote memos on to staff. As I reread the report, I saw that the report was a better product. Not that the report writers didn't do a great job, but I do think that my colleagues on the board have taken a good report and made it even better. So thank you for doing that. I'd also like to thank you, my colleagues, for the good discussion and debate. I think this is, we don't always have to agree. Here's a case where we did, but I think that we get a better product through these debates and discussions. So thank you for that. Member Hamady, thank you and your team for your work as board member on scene. Special thanks go to the investigator in charge, Adam Tucker, and for our Office of Marine Safety, who led a successful investigation under very challenging conditions. But Joe P. works in, is our fire expert who works in research and engineering. So really nothing around here gets done by just one person or one staff, one department. It is an agency-wide effort that gets these things done. And that includes the program and the support staff. It also includes those behind the scenes that work to pull off a technical production to allow a board meeting with people all over the country. So thank you to everyone. The recommendations that we've issued today, if implemented, and that's the key, if implemented, would reduce the risk of future passenger vessel fires growing undetected, and it would ensure that escape routes exit to different spaces, improving the chances for survival for passengers and crew. We recommend that Truth Aquatics implement safety management system, and we reiterated our recommendation for the U.S. Coast Guard to require SMS for all passenger vessels, an action that's long overdue. The Congress mandated that 10 years ago. The NTSB recommended it 8 years ago. It's past time to act. Thank you. We stand adjourned.